One of my favorite stories of the Wild West is that of Hugh Glass. He signed up in 1823 to go on a fur trapping expedition, his first journey ever. The group departed from St. Louis in March of that year. Shortly after, were attacked by Native Americans where Glass was wounded, but he survived. But if that attack wasn't enough, Glass was in his group, was in present-day South Dakota, where he was attacked by a grizzly bear. He killed the grizzly bear, but the grizzly bear broke his leg, ripped his scalp, punctured his throat, and he had numerous gashes. You think you had a bad day at work this week, right? This is difficult stuff, but it gets worse. Believing him to be mortally wounded, the expedition leader left two men, John Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger, to stay with Glass until he died. However, several days later, Fitzgerald and Bridger thought, you know what, we're going to rejoin the group. He's going to die anyways. They dug a shallow grave, placed him in it, took all of his stuff, and left him. There's just one problem. He didn't die. He didn't die. Not knowing what to do, he laid there and regained enough strength and began the arduous journey to Fort Kiowa, 300 miles away. It took him 3 months to make the journey as he mostly crawled on his hands and knees. He made it to the fort, and although he carried some scars, they said his face was distorted from then on out, he actually made a full recovery. Now think with me for a second. If you're in Glass's shoes, how would you feel about those two guys that abandoned you? Pretty upset, right? Pretty angry. For a long time, it said that he was seeking revenge against them. You know, we could understand that terrible feeling. But more importantly, consider what it would be like to be Fitzgerald or Bridger. What if you got word, oh, hey, that guy that you left, Hugh Glass, we saw him the other day. Or what if he walked up to you and you're like, ooh, I left you for dead. How would you feel in that moment? Because it's easy in life to think of someone who betrayed you. We've all been betrayed somehow. The harder thing to do is to think of who have you betrayed? Who have you let down? And it's with this theme in mind that we open up to chapter 26 in Matthew's gospel. We are sprinting towards the climax of the story about Jesus. But for today, I have a challenge for you. I want you to see if you can track in this story all the times Jesus is betrayed in this chapter. So with betrayal as the backdrop, pray with me as we get started. Our Father in heaven, give us eyes to see and ears to hear your reign on earth as it is in heaven. Allow us the ability to heal from those who have betrayed us and to overcome the betrayal we have caused of others. Pour through me the gift of preaching that the desire for Christ's kingdom would grow in our hearts. I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, as you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas. And they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. While Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured out on his head as he was reclining on the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. Why this waste, they asked. This perfume could have been sold at the high price and the money given to the poor. Aware of this, Jesus said to them, why are you bothering this woman? She's done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." So this section in Matthew, this chapter, is much like the continued theme throughout the Gospel of Matthew. It's meant to show us how Jesus is the new Moses. In other words, leading us to a new freedom. So last week we finished up Jesus' 5th teaching in the Gospel of Matthew. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. We're supposed to see how that aligns here. And now we are going towards the Passover, Israel's greatest celebration of Exodus, where Moses, through God, helped lead them to freedom. It's all about freedom. But you see, Exodus, for them, was not just a history event looking back. Exodus was always about looking forward to a newfound freedom. And could you imagine what it would be like to celebrate Passover under Roman occupation? To be longing, to be able to rule yourselves, to govern yourselves, to make decisions for yourselves. And they always believed that the true king would come at Passover. So I think this Passover, like many of the ones before it, they were thinking, is this the one? Could this be the one where the Messiah would come? But for now, Caiaphas, the high priest, serves as the nominal head, as king of the people, absent a true king. And the elders serve as what we might call Congress today. They represent the people in Israel with the capital city of Jerusalem. And the response of these leaders over the past few weeks, over the past few chapters has been, we're upset with Jesus, we're frustrated with Jesus, we're confronting Jesus, to now, let's kill him. Okay, let's get rid of him, let's kill him. And the theme of this death carries over into the dinner party. I imagine it being a great dinner party at Simon the leper's house. They're having a really good time. And this woman comes in and the mood changes. It changes as she pours this expensive perfume all over Jesus' body, starting at his head. This perfume was probably worth about a year's wages. And so the disciples asked the question that every cynical church member asked the elders: is that really a good way to spend the money? Right? I don't know about this. Think about all the people with the year's wages, all the poor they could have fed with that money. A very practical, logical thought that we wrestle with and debate many times in the church. But Jesus uses common logic of their day to talk about what's going on here. If you notice, he's citing the laws in Deuteronomy there. And it was a common exemption that you could drop everything to take care of the debt. Okay, this is morbid here, but bodies decomposed faster back then than they do now. You're on a short time frame. You need to prepare this body. And Jesus is saying, you don't got much longer with me. And I don't think they're fully understanding or comprehending what Jesus is saying here. And yet early on in this chapter, the betrayal is starting to take shape. The Jewish leaders are working for a way to betray Jesus. The disciples aren't understanding what Jesus is saying about his death. And they are starting to maybe see hints of how they will betray him. But then we see it come into the forefront. So the worst betrayal of all time starts to take place. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He replied, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, 'The teacher says, my appointed time is near. I am coming to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house.'" So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." They were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord." Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who has betrayed the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi." Jesus answered, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took the bread, and when he gave thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mountain of Olives. The thing that jumps off the page to me in this section are Judas's words. "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" Isn't that really a question we all wrestle with sometimes? I mean, what would it take for us to turn from Jesus? For Judas, it took 30 pieces of silver, today about $300 worth of money. For Judas, Jesus was worth about $300. What is Jesus worth to you? You see, Jesus at Passover declares his worth. Jesus knows what Judas is up to here, and he calls Judas out on it, even though Judas denies it. But something more valuable is happening here at the Passover meal. As Christians, this text is often read as a communion thought, what we just celebrated a few minutes ago. We read it, we reflect on it, we think of those things oftentimes, but I want us in our minds to try to think of it in the 12 disciples' viewpoint. This is the Passover celebration. Okay, this is the biggest religious event. There are things taking shape that they do every time to remember Passover. That's what they're trying to do here. They would have it memorized, well, like we would have memorized Christmas traditions. And so in high school, our church on Good Friday one time had a Messianic Jew come in and lead our whole church in the fellowship hall through a Jewish Passover. I was a cynical teenager and I did not want to go. That sounded like the most miserable thing I could think of doing at 17 years old. But my girlfriend was going. So I went. And man, it ended up being one of the most cool, like fascinating things I think I've done is we participated in this. And they talked to us about the significance, not just what we would think of in communion terms, but also in Passover terms of what was going on here. And so what would have been weird to the 12 is Jesus is making the Passover all about himself. They might have been tempted to think, is Jesus a narcissist here? What is going on? Why is he making this all about him? The matzah recalls the haste of the flight from Egypt with no time for the bread to rise. But Jesus is now saying he's the bread of life. A lamb recalls a blood sacrifice that allowed the angel of death to pass them over. But Jesus is saying he is now that. Jesus is doing something weird here, but it has something to say about freedom. But But there's one piece, or multiple pieces, but one significant piece of what is left out of communion that Jesus is doing here in chapter 26. See, in the Passover celebration, there is the bitter cup. This was the time where Aubrey and I, sitting doing this Passover celebration, learned something about each other. We all took the bitter cup together as a church. And oh my goodness, that horseradish was delicious. Aubrey did not think so. Aubrey immediately spit it out, declaring it the worst thing she had ever had. And I was like, this is great. And the other kids who weren't eating all theirs around said, I'll eat your horseradish. But the bitter cup is to think about all the difficult times of bitterness, of bondage, of without freedom. Because this bitter taste, this polarizing taste of horseradish is to remind us of that. And this bitter cup is what Jesus is doing through this passion here starting in chapter 26. He's come to be the suffering servant. We use this term passion to describe these events around Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. The Latin origin of passion means to suffer. Jesus is to suffer, and the first form of suffering is betrayal. So let's continue on as we read about this. Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the very same thing. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and they began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. He watched and prayed so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he lifted them and went away once more and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Did you catch that Peter is saying he would die before denying Jesus? And the other disciples say the same thing as well. And literally the next section over, they're already sleeping on the job. The chapter isn't even over before they go back on their word. And Jesus is in Gethsemane, which is known as the oil press. In other words, he's feeling the pressure of all the weight of all the sin and shame and the world on him. He is suffering to the point of death. And his friends can't even stay awake with him. Not even for an hour. They can't even sit by his side. But the 3rd time he catches them asleep, it's too late. The betrayer is on his way. And here's when the tragedy happens. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and will he not at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" In that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion that you would come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this all has taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then the disciples deserted him and fled. In the darkness, you see the contrast between darkness and light. In the darkness, they come to arrest Jesus out of fear of what would happen to Jesus. Judas gives the signal of intimacy. A kiss. By a kiss, he betrayed the Son of Man. And do you notice what Jesus has to say back to Judas after betraying him? I mean, think about this. Well, you can read this in the next chapter. Spoiler alert here. The last word Judas ever heard from Jesus was friend. It's the last thing Jesus ever said to Judas. Friend, as he betrayed him. And yet the disciples missed the point. One of them, who Matthew tries to keep anonymous here, but the other Gospels call him out, Peter, is trying to fight, right? He pulls out his sword, and Jesus is telling him to stop. That if you live by kingdoms of this world, you will die like kingdoms of this world die. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. But Jesus' kingdom is completely different. Jesus is trying to say, I'm in control here. I have 12 legions of angels at my disposal at any moment. Do you know a legion is 6,000 soldiers? 12 legions, 72,000 angels at any minute could come into the mob and say, get out of here. Right? But no, that's not the plan. In fact, this was one of the temptations that Satan gave Jesus in the wilderness. Look at this. You can have all this. Call the angels, jump off. The angels will save you. No, Jesus has turned down that temptation, and he is on mission to live out what God has called him to live. He's committed to it. And meanwhile, all of his disciples betray him. They flee. They take off. They scatter. They hide, even saying just earlier they would not do such a thing. And so Jesus goes on trial. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teacher of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they did not find any. Though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, two came forward and declared, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so," Jesus replied. But I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes, and he has spoken blasphemy. "Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you?" Now Peter was sitting in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again with an oath. "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. They can't find any charges to bring to Jesus that are worthy of death. That is until the current leader, Caiaphas, asks if Jesus is the king. Jesus not only doesn't deny it, but he cites Daniel chapter 7, the prophecy, the great prophecy of the Messiah, the king to come. He is saying he is going to fulfill those things, and the leaders of Jesus' day, they just can't see it. So in outrage, they're angry, they're tearing their clothes, they're saying this is blasphemy, they're slapping Jesus, they're spitting Jesus, they're hitting him, they're humiliating him, but they got what they wanted. Because they couldn't kill Jesus on their own. They didn't have the power to do that. But Caesar was king. And to claim there is another king than Caesar means they can have him executed. And so they take their king away, and we will see next week what happens to their king. But Peter, who already declared Jesus the Messiah, is following at a distance. The servant girls start recognizing. And did you see all the exclamation marks in there? He's bringing down curses. He's swearing oaths. He's like, I don't know. What are you even talking about? Man, he talked really tough at the Passover meal. In the garden, he seemed kind of tough, pulling out his sword, right? And now he's denying him. And the rooster crows. And the chapter ends with Peter weeping. And it's in Peter's tears that I want us to sit for a minute and think. You know, I think maybe a really good definition for sin is betraying God. Sin is when we betray God. The original sin was certainly betraying God's commands in the garden, eating from the tree. But if you think about it, many of our sins are when we do what we want to do. When we do what we think is best for us, we take God's ways, God's commands, God's rules, what God wants for us, and we say, no. We're going to live by the theologian's Fleetwood Mac. Go your own way, right? And when we go our own way, that leads to devastation, just like in the Fleetwood Mac song, and just like our lives have experienced all too many times. But think about everyone in this chapter. Everyone in this chapter is just doing what's best for them. The Jewish leaders, they want to hold on to their power. Caiaphas doesn't want another king. He gets to be king. The elders, they don't want to give up their power. They want to hold on to what they have. So they are doing what is best for them. For Judas, this thing wasn't working out how he thought it would go. He wasn't calling Jesus Messiah. He was still calling him Rabbi or teacher. So he sells Jesus for a little extra cash. The disciples are fearful. So they run away, they hide. Peter thinks he's maybe going to go under trial the exact same way Jesus just has. So he starts lying to protect himself. But there's one person in this chapter that gets it right. Did you catch that person? Matthew doesn't even give her a name. Just woman. Certainly she's preparing him for burial, but she's also playing the role of Samuel, the prophet. See, when Samuel went to anoint David, they went and they found all of his brothers, and he didn't really fit the mold, their brothers. They weren't the anointed ones, so they brought Daniel from the fields, and they anointed Daniel's head, or King David's head, with oil. The key in this is where Jesus was anointed, on his head. A Messiah literally means anointed one. King David was the anointed one. Now here we have the anointed king. And the only one who gets this right in the chapter is this unidentified woman. In fact, while all the men betrayed Jesus, she is the only one that is staying faithful. From here on out, actually, the women will take the lead as being the faithful ones in the story. And so Jesus said, wherever this gospel is preached, what she has done should be told in memory of her. And so today I follow Jesus' command. And Jesus here, from start to finish, is following God's will, even as he prays it in the garden. We see in the garden that Jesus prays for this cup of suffering to pass, but not your will, or not my will, but yours, Lord, is his ultimate prayer. In Matthew chapter 6, we see something we thought we'd never see. Could we say that God even betrays Jesus here? That God says, you will take the suffering, the sin, and the shame that everyone else deserves, and I'm going to give that to you. The bitter cup. The bitter cup. Paul, explaining this moment in 2 Corinthians, would say, God made him who had no sin. Why? So that in him we might become the righteousness of God. In the background of this chapter is the start of what we'll see unfolding next week. Isaiah chapter 15 or 53, the role of a suffering servant. Surely he took upon our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And man, the pain of the suffering Jesus will go through next week is excruciating, but the pain of betrayal, I think, cuts deeper than any knife. But have you realized over and over and over again in this chapter how Jesus responds to his betrayals? He responds in love. Throughout the Passion, this will be what he does. He will respond in love over and over again. And so in the coming weeks, I want you to notice something. I want you to notice the difference in how people reconcile their betrayal with Jesus. How do Peter and Judas react to their betrayal of Jesus? How did the disciples act versus how the Jewish leaders react to their betrayal? And notice what all of this has to do. God made him who had no sin so we might become. Jesus in love responds for what we might become. That we could be known as betrayers, those who have sinned against God. But God said, no, I don't want you to be that. I want you to be righteous. And so chapter 26 happens so we can be righteous, that this story can be your story too. You don't have to be defined by your betrayal. You can be defined by what Jesus enables you to become, and that brings me to Hugh Glass. Hugh Glass' story was depicted in Leonardo DiCaprio's movie in 2015 called The Revenant. However, this movie varies significantly from the real story of Hugh Glass. Some minor notes like the grizzly bear attacks seem to happen in the redwoods of Oregon instead of the plains of South Dakota. Missed that one, Leo. But more importantly, spoiler alert, you've had 10 years to watch the movie. I'm going to ruin it for you right now if you haven't. Hollywood, when they saw the script of the real story, they said it was too unbelievable. So they changed the plot. The plot of the movie is Hugh Glass tracking down those guys that abandoned him and in revenge, killing them. And for a while, Glass certainly wanted revenge. And yes, Glass did track down John Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger, but he tracked them down and forgave them. The story of forgiveness was too unbelievable for Hollywood. And do you see the story that's happening here? The story of forgiveness to betrayal. I mean, Jesus is chasing down all of our betrayals in grace and in love and is forgiving them. Because here's the part of the Hugh Glass story that we often don't know or we often forget. Here is the rest of the story of Paul Harvey would say. The rookie trapper named Jim Bridger, who left Hugh Glass to die, grew into one of the most iconic mountain men in the history of the Wild West. Go to Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and see if you can't find something bearing Jim Bridger's name. You have the Bridger Range, you have the Bridger Peak, you have Bridger Pass, you have the Bridger National Forest, just to name a few. And if Glass would have killed Bridger in revenge, would we have had Bridger's story? Do you see, church, how forgiveness works? In other words, do you see how forgiveness heals the world? Jesus here is taking all the betrayals of all the world on him. And in love, he is forgiving them in grace for what we might become. For the Bridgers we might turn into, for the beauty that we may make on the world, for the impact we can turn into because we get to be his righteous ones, his chosen ones, his holy priesthood, these great people doing good works on his behalf. Because God loves the world. And so the ball is in your court. How will you handle this grace extended to all your betrayals? Will you handle it like the high priests and the elders will handle it? Will you handle your extension of love and grace like Judas handles this grace offered to him? Or can you overcome your betrayals? Like the disciples who fell asleep or fled when Jesus needed them? Will you overcome your grace like Peter and go on to lead the church? How will you handle this? The ball's in your court. The choice is yours.